Hi there, Joe D. How are you?
Good. How are you?
Good, good. So thanks again for agreeing to do this short video. You know, for folks listening on LinkedIn and other social platforms, we wanted to bring you to the forefront and introduce you to our audience because as a programmer and someone that's been in the space for a very long time, a lot of clients may not actually know who you are. And just to give some background on who you are and how we all came together. And by the way, I like your new office mate back there. Does he have a name?
Bob. Yeah, that's Bob. He's an Orioles fan,
Right.
so he suffers right along with me.
Okay, great. So he's the one that does the QA of your programming then, yeah?
No, no, yeah, yeah, he does. Yeah.
Awesome, awesome. So Joe, you and I have been working together actually now for 17 years. So you knew me back when my hair was brown, back in
Yes.
my younger days. We've worked together across 3 different companies. We started together
Mhm.
at Harris Interactive back in 2003, and then moved on to USAMP, where you joined the team a few years after I did. And now you're here at InnovateMR. You've
Yeah.
been with us since January, and we are so thrilled to have you here, heading up our programming and hosting services for the company. And we thought
Mhm.
it would be really great to get you on video and share out to our audience so that they can meet you and meet your colleague there in the background. So
Yeah.
to kick things off, I definitely have a few questions for you. I want to get into
Sure.
your brain and share some of this good insight that you have, but give us a little background on who you are and how you came into the industry.
Sure. Yeah, I'm glad to be here to do this. As nervous as it made me when you first requested this video, happy to do it. Yeah, as you mentioned, we met each other, 17 years ago. I started in the industry in '98 with Harris Interactive. At that time, it was still called the Gordon S. Black Corporation, based in Rochester. I went to school to be a math teacher, though. That was my original goal. Believe it or not, I did not go to school to join the market research industry. I did not study market research in college.
Not many of us
Um,
did, honestly. A lot
I
of
know,
people that I
I
talked
know
to
that's
say the same
we
thing.
all sort of ended up in most of us ended up in market research. So, but yeah, so I started back in '98 as a junior programmer. In college, I had done some programming as part of the math curriculum. You have to. And I'd always kind of, when I was a younger kid, I was into programming when you actually could buy a computer and put it in your house. Um, so I had a bit of the background, but I had never done it before. That was really my first career, honestly. I mean, my first real job was the career that I'm still in here 22 years later. So, as you mentioned, yeah, we worked at 3 different companies together. I've worked at a couple of other companies besides that, probably programmed on, what did I count the other day? Like maybe 6 different survey platforms now, some proprietary ones, some of the bigger ones like, that everyone has heard of, but a lot of proprietary ones. So yeah, and then done kind of the whole gamut of the operations part of the process, from programming, even a little bit of sampling, definitely done some data processing, but I've always felt pulled more towards the survey programming side. I really do like that part of the process. So that's usually been what my focus has been through all my different uh, positions and companies. So
That's great. That's great. So in other words, you're an old timer and you've been doing this for a long time.
I have been. That'd be the short way to say it. Yeah.
Yeah. How do you think programming has evolved since you started way back in the late 90s? What changes have you
Yeah, that's
experienced?
good question. I mean, it's faster for sure. We all know that. We've seen that. It's not getting slower. Let's put it that way. I think programming in operations in general is very much we react. We're a support organization. So we support other people's ideas generally. You come to us with something, and we have to figure out how to do that, how to execute it. So I think programming changes as the industry changes, and the industry changes as technology changes. So when you and I started, we were, phone research was still going on quite a bit. We were just making the leap to online. So obviously, when that happened, everything was on the table. There was this huge opportunity, all this new technology. Everyone wanted to use it. They weren't quite sure how to use it. And, you know, it was a very exciting time in programming as a result, because we were constantly solving new problems every day. I mean, you and I worked on quite a few of those together. So there was just a lot of, it was very dynamic, you know, and that happened again more recently with mobile, right? I mean, but it's sort of, as the technology changes, programming changes along with it. I mean, other than that, the big difference is the more DIY. Who's doing the programming? I'd say that's the biggest difference. While we talked about it, maybe, you know, at least 20 years ago, I remember talking to some people at Harris, you know, about developing a tool that would allow the survey authors, the researchers, to directly contribute to building the survey, you know, and then the programmer would come in and finish it off, that kind of collaborative sort of thing. So there was talk about doing that, you know, as, you know, 20 years ago, but now it's happening for sure. I mean, DIY is very much a focus of survey platforms. Now, any new survey platforms definitely focused on who's going to be using it. And it's not always the programmer they have in mind.
Right.
So
Yeah.
who's doing the programming is definitely a big change.
Right. Yeah. There's been, I think, an increasing democratization to research on all fronts, not just programming, but also we see that very much so in the sampling space.
Absolutely.
And while it's great to have that DIY functionality, I think there's pitfalls that you've seen as programming expert. And so what are those pitfalls that you've seen in the past that you really try to correct for and to altogether avoid, that would be helpful for those in the DIY space to learn more about?
Yeah, I mean, as far as for non-programmers, I mean, a big pitfall would be, you know, I think just trying to take too much on. I mean, I think that exists in any DIY kind of scenario, right? You think of home improvement. You know, you're going to do a project at home. You're like, do I want to? I can probably do that myself, or I could hire a professional, right? And you look up a couple videos online. You're like, oh, this seems pretty simple. I can do this. And then you get yourself into a huge jam, and you can't actually do the thing. You should have just hired someone in the first place. That would be the first. I mean, for a DIYer, I mean, that would be the big pitfall. Like, you know, don't bite off more than you can chew, for sure. Leave it to the professionals when it makes sense. You know, for programmers, I mean, the biggest thing, I kind of alluded to it as one of the pressures that we face is the speed, you know, and timing, how things have gotten faster and faster. And I think the biggest mistake a programmer can make is to sacrifice quality or compromise quality or risk quality in the name of making a deadline. You know, and even related to that, not giving yourself enough time, over promising, you know, on the timeline for something, not just starting out in a hole. You know, you haven't given yourself enough time to do the whole job. Instead of, well, I can make this deadline if everything goes 100% perfectly. That's, you know, I've seen that happen a lot of times. And then you get that little pressure, that little pull to maybe cut a corner and roll the dice and hope that what you produced is correct. And, you know, hopefully, you know, hopefully there aren't any major consequences, but honestly, you know, while a client might be dissatisfied and maybe consider looking to another partner if you miss a deadline, they definitely are going to if you make errors. So never compromise quality for the timeline, for sure.
Yeah, I absolutely agree. You have to really look at the questionnaire and make sure that you're pacing out an adequate schedule. And that's always been, I think, a source of frustration for me, and an observation that I've made in various roles that I've had across the organizations that we've worked together in, is ensure that you really give the operational piece, the programming, the data collection, the sample percolation, I'll call it, adequate time to do its job. You know, we can spend weeks and weeks developing a questionnaire, putting a research plan together, but then oftentimes the observation I've seen is that there's very little time provided for the actual data collection piece. And arguably that is the most important piece of the whole pie. So as it relates to some of the pitfalls you mentioned, conversely to that, what are some of the best practices? I think, you know, I've always said the more experience you get, the more things become very intuitive. You can anticipate problems before they happen. You can anticipate questions before the client asks them. I think that's really been a big driver for us in terms of our hiring strategy here at Innovate. We've hired people that have a lot of experience, a lot of tenure in the space, because there's certain things you just learn on the street. So what are
Sure.
some of those best practices that you've learned along the way that you think are important to point out here?
Yeah, it's tough because a lot of them are intuitive, and it's hard to put a finger on how you do what you do. I mean, I think in any programming discipline, one of the main things you try to do is anything that you write, you want it to be reusable, for one. That's a best practice I think most programmers would employ. If you're going to put the effort in, at least be able to reuse what you did. I like to have a common routine when I attack a programming job. There's a lot of elements to programming a survey, right? You have the visual element. If we're talking an online survey, which most of what we're doing. You have the visual element, so you have the words, the highlighting of the words, images, and you have that element, and then obviously you have the logic element underneath it all. What's controlling survey branching and all that kind of thing. And I think there's different ways you can attack getting all of that done and into the finished product. Some programmers I've known will attack it question by question, and they'll do everything, the visual and the logical elements of the question, and then move on to the next question. Other people will do the whole, they'll build maybe the shell, and then they'll layer in the logic after that. We're not gonna get into the weeds of which one's better, but I think what is important is whichever way you do it, always do it that way.
Mm-hmm.
Be consistent. I keep talking about timing, but we really do have tight timelines, and there is a pressure to get things right the first time, quite honestly. And you're less likely to miss stuff if you're always kind of following a nice process instead of just flying by the seat of your pants every time, But I mean, the other best practice, you kind of said it, is just anticipating change. Don't paint yourself in. I try not to paint myself into a corner, particularly if you're working with a very complicated section of logic, let's say in a survey, right? And you spend a lot of time getting it just right. I always try to think of what will happen if the client changes their mind and I've got to adjust this. Because sometimes, I mean, it doesn't happen very often. Once in a blue moon, the client will change their mind. That's a joke, Lisa. Anyway, so I always try to think like, what will I do if they change their mind and want to adjust this? Am I going to have to rewrite the whole thing, or can I actually just make a couple of adjustments and boom, I'll be ready to go? There's nothing like clients expect changes to be very quick. So, you do want to make sure you don't, again, paint yourself into a corner with something that, a particularly complicated section of the survey. So, I mean, some of those are, it is sort of intuitive, like you said, just sort of anticipating what could happen. Mm-hmm. But I think when it comes to rubber meeting the road, just keep that in mind. What will I do? Can I change this? Is this too complicated? Do I need to rewrite it? Those are the kinds of things that maybe you can actually apply in programming.
Yeah, I like how you've described that, like don't paint yourself into a corner. And I know that there's been lots of projects, whether they're for clients or even internal studies, research on research that you do in collaboration with me and the team that I work with here at Innovate. And what I love about working with you is that, you don't necessarily say it's a hard no. You might say that, hey, there might be a better way to optimize this question or render it on a mobile device. And I think that's another key takeaway for me, as I've learned through the years, is make sure you're testing on both desktop and mobile, because the experience can be very different. Also, just because the survey renders on a mobile device doesn't really mean it's optimized for a mobile user. And I think that's something that younger researchers and programmers may not always take into account, that they might be using a widely known commercially licensed platform that says on its marketing that this will render automatically for mobile users, but the design of your survey really has a major impact on that. And what I've loved about our collaboration through the years, Joe, is that you've been able to sort of raise your hand and say, no, you might want to rethink this, and offering solutions to our clients and to my team, so that we're not necessarily having to leave some of these important design elements out, but just rethink them, rejigger them, so that we're really thinking about participants and the experience that participants are having, not only, certainly I'm very biased to make sure the participant experience is a good one.
Yep.
I think it's a really overlooked element in our space. I see a lot of surveys, and I think to some extent with the rise of DIY, of course, there's going to be more bad surveys that get written and deployed out to our participant universe. But I've really enjoyed working with you through the years because you've been able to keep that participant first strategy employed, so that surveys are really doing what they should for respondents. Because if the respondents aren't having a good, pleasant experience, you're going to see higher attrition in the sources that they come from, whether it's a panel or API programmatic sampling, however you procure your sample, but also higher drop-off rate within the survey, certainly lower quality in the data that's being collected in the survey. So there's very real material impact that can happen through poor design. And not thinking about all those angles. And so working with programmers like yourself has been really invaluable to our clients and to my team internally to help us think about things from the different angles. And so with that, I have one last question for you.
Okay.
And it can be programming specific, or you can
Sure.
talk about, business and being a working professional, in a larger sense. But, if you were to give advice to young Joe D, back when I first started working with you in the early 2000s, or thinking about younger researchers that are just starting their career today, or younger programmers for that matter, what advice would you give some of those folks that are just getting started in the industry?
Well, I mean, like we've said, there are people like us with a lot of experience. We're unfortunately not the only ones that have this kind of experience. My advice would be know who your resources are and reach out to them. Ask questions. And this would be advice I would have told myself as well. I don't think this is restricted to the programmer mentality, but there's a certain, particularly when you're new, it's a combination of ego and insecurity. You're afraid that asking questions shows that you don't know the answer already, like you're somehow supposed to know the answer already. You don't get any extra credit for doing something on your own that's already been done before. Reach out, use the resources you have. Like I said, there's a lot of people out there that know a lot. They might, a lot of things have been done before. There's no point in reinventing the wheel, as we always say. And it's even worse. You can, it could cause a mistake. You communicate the wrong information. I don't know how many times I've seen an email go out, not here, but in other places, you see an email go out communicating to a client, and it's incorrect information, and you're copied on it. Like, if you just would have asked me, I could have made sure that you were giving the right information. Just really use your resources. Save your energy for new problems. I mean, that's what's fun. If it's already been done, just don't redo it. I mean, I think for younger Joe, it would definitely be that. Like I said, be patient and keep perspective. Like you were describing, I think what I bring to projects now, I didn't always bring. And I think there are some, I know I didn't always bring it. Of course I didn't, but I think there's a tendency in our industry, people get very specialized. This is what they do, and they can tend to, there's benefits to specialization, obviously, but then the negative consequence is that you don't see the whole picture of the whole project. And you lose perspective. You lose the client's perspective. You lose the respondent's perspective, as you were talking about. You have to keep all of that in mind. It's not just, I'm just going to program the survey was delivered to me. Keeping the data side, what the data perspective as well. So having perspective on all of those different pieces, and yes, you have a part to play in that, but, all the parts need to play well together, in order for the project to be a real success. So, I think having that perspective is really important and different. I didn't always have it, and unfortunately, I think you find yourself, you're in a good company when those kinds of conversations are happening. Everyone is included. They're not keeping the programmers in some dark back room. The programmers are involved with client conversations. The programmers are involved with the design phase. You know, that's when you know you're in a good company. And, you know, we do that at Innovate. We're involved whenever we interview for new programmers. We say, I hope you're, you know, comfortable being on calls with clients to talk to, you know, because you're going to talk to clients and give advice on certain things. You know, we're not just order takers here. So, so yeah, I mean, I guess that was a long answer. I think I had a couple of things.
Great advice. If only we could have had conversations with our younger selves, we would be
Sure.
would be so much further than we are today. You don't know. You know, I think from my side, I would have said to younger Lisa, never assume anything. Like always check, trust but verify. You know, it can take a few extra seconds, minutes, but that assurance of knowing that you've double checked, that you're making sure that your output is high quality. Don't assume things on face value. That's a big takeaway from my side. And I think, you know, your recommendation of leaning on those resources, asking questions, being curious and inquisitive is so important. And I do think a lot of younger researchers, younger programmers feel that they have to sort of prove their worth, prove their place. And maybe are a little reluctant to raise their hand and ask those questions. And I always say to our team here, there's no wrong question to ask here. Let's have a real collaborative discussion. So this has been great. Thank you so much, Joe, for taking time out of the day. I know we're all virtually based now, but we're actually in the same city. We're both based here in Rochester, New York. So looks like we're going to have some good weather later today. So let's keep our fingers crossed. But yeah, certainly for those listening in, if you have questions on programming or you want some consultation on survey design, of course, lean on Joe and I. And in fact, we recognize a lot of clients are struggling during this time of COVID. There's a really, you know, impact that all of us are feeling in the space and in other industries as well. And we know that, you know, certainly there's been a lot of B2B focused research being done on the impact COVID is having in the professional environment. And so we always recommend working with a sample provider that is Microsoft certified. So if you guys all have questions about reaching out to business professionals to understand the impacts of COVID, please do not hesitate to reach out to Joe and I. We'll make sure our contact information is included. You know, I hope you don't mind, Joe, but I'm going to offer free programming for clients that come to us to purchase B2B samples. So, you know, certainly you have tons of value to add, but I want to add value to our clients during this difficult time. So if you're looking to field a B2B study, you know, you can come to InnovateMR for that support. And we will, of course, offer free programming and hosting services during this difficult time. So with that, thank you so much, Joe, for your time. And we will all talk to you later. Take care.
Thanks. Bye-bye.